Hi everyone, welcome to Disposable Entertainment. I'm Lee, your host, and I'll be giving you my honest thoughts as to was Dead Space 3 so bad? Seeing as both the Dead Space remake and the Callisto Protocol was revealed, I thought I would take a look at the final game in the Dead Space series. Dead Space 3 was panned by critics and players alike, and for the same reason I had no interest in this title. What I heard was that it had dropped the horror element completely in favor of a more action-orientated sequel to both games we all loved and played to death. With the announcement of both the remake and Callisto Protocol, which is a pseudo-spiritual successor to Dead Space by the same creators of the original, namely Glenn Schofield, who worked on the original Dead Space in 2008. When I first started this game, I was introduced to an ice planet and notably was not playing as the original protagonist Isaac Clarke. I thought it was quite odd, but soon found out why, as you're killed off and then your story with Isaac begins. I have to say that the story is a convoluted mess. Maybe it's been too long since I played the first two games in this series, or I was going insane because I couldn't follow the story at all. It was so badly written that I had to look up the plot on Wikipedia. What's stated there is this, quote, "The opening sequence, set 2 centuries in the past, shows a military team retrieving an artifact called the Codex. The team's commander kills his remaining subordinates, erases data on the Codex, and then commits suicide. In the present, while hiding on the colony of Earth's moon, Isaac is forcibly recruited by Carver and Norton to help them find Ellie, escaping a necromorph outbreak triggered by Danik and the Circle. Ellie's location is traced by Tau Volantis, assumed to be the Marker homeworld, orbited by a single moon. Isaac goes there along with Carver, Norton, Santos, and Buckle. Rescuing Ellie, they investigate the orbiting derelict ship Terra Nova, discovering evidence of past research on the necromorphs and the recurring phrase, "turn it off." Blah 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 blah. Let's face it, you're not playing Dead Space for the story. You're playing it to have your anxiety levels at peak and being terrified beyond belief. Well, I'm sad to say that the critics were sort of right, but definitely not to the degree of the ratings. How I understood the reviews back in 2013 was that it was an action-only focused game. I was gladly mistaken. There are some terrifying moments. Not as scary or as unnerving as the originals, but still scary enough to where you do feel a sense of urgency. I liked the layout of the game. Some parts were damn terrifying while some were more action-orientated, which I didn't mind at all because it broke up the monotony of an only terrifying game and gave us a bit of a breather between being terrified beyond our wits and good old-fashioned shootout, which I do like. Some of the enemies are utterly terrifying, while some are just absolutely boring and bring no tension. There's a race of enemies that you'll face a couple of times that look like zombie monster children. These parts were just so damn irritating. I'm convinced that the end boss was easier than killing these little guys. There's so many of them at a time that it was almost impossible to run or even roll away. The next thing you know, you're dead, and it's by the silliest enemies in the game. Besides those little monster children, as I call them, the rest of the enemies were really fun to kill, and some gave quite a challenge. I died quite a few times on my own accord, as I could have dodged or reloaded at a more convenient time. These deaths felt deserved, unlike the deaths with those little children monsters. The whole setting of the game is pretty good. I like the spacing of everything, and they need to make sure you search every nook and cranny for supplies. The supply drops are pretty much identical to the first two games. They're either given to you by stomping on dead enemies, which most of the time drop health, ammo, or even upgrades. The pacing of the game is done well too. I remember playing the originals and I was an anxious wreck after reaching a save point, which to my joy was that the game auto-saves this time around. I liked the save points in the first two games, but the autosave feature in the third is a nice change. Yes, it does lessen the anxiety levels a bit, but for me it's a welcome change. The enemy design was great too. A lot of enemies are very similar to what you've seen before, but there are newer enemies that were not as scary, but took quite a lot of firepower to damage. I liked the change, and I didn't take my focus off the enemies that were more scary. The problem with Dead Space 3 is the game is not as confined as the previous two. There are a lot more open spaces which lessen the horror experience. I know that's a contradiction to what I just said, but at times you wish you were thrown into an anxious panic. So with that aspect put out, I agree with the critics, but the openness brings a whole new element to the game. For one, you're not stuck on one ship the whole way through. There's spaceship events, zero gravity space scenes which I loved, and then more open grounded areas in the snow or in the caverns and caves. I did enjoy that a lot. Being confined to hallways in a spaceship tend to feel a bit old, and I'm glad they took this route. What I didn't like was some of the puzzles. They seemed like they were placed just there to make simple door opening a chore. Some of the puzzles were stupid and had no place in the game. We could really have done without them. Later on in the game, you're given puzzles that make sense to the game. But don't give me a silly puzzle to open a door. It's a waste of time and has no place in any game, let alone Dead Space. There's quite a lot of customization available, from weapons to even great suit upgrades. Luckily, when you change a suit, your upgrades carry on with you in your new suit. For some other reason, to me, weapon upgrades in any game are confusing and cumbersome. Going into a bench upgrade station takes a lot of the tension away at times, and they're spread out too heavily. Sometimes I would have just upgraded my weapons, and then a couple of minutes later you're just welcomed by another upgrade station. I didn't like that at all. There's lots of customization to be done, and a ton of weapons to create. But after a while of playing, I stuck to the weapons I enjoyed, and upgraded them to full capacity. Most of my playthrough was played with a maximum of 5 weapons. I had many more crafted in my safe, but never felt the need to change them, as I could do what I wanted with what I already had. You're given a drone scout that takes the 3rd spot on your weapon wheel. The drone scouts out the area you're in and picks up parts for you to do upgrades and craft new weapons. But I would rather have liked a 3rd weapon option instead of the scout. I used it 2 or 3 times and then didn't even use it again, as all the parts I needed were found in the typical manner of killing enemies or finding upgrades in lockers or breakable boxes. The ending of the game is just a bit monotonous as you go back and forth through areas you've just been through. Maybe the designers did it this way so that you are hunted by enemies you missed in your first walkthrough of that same path, but I usually kill everything and then move on. So there was almost no reason to go through these areas again. Some areas have new enemies, but by that time you just want to get off that same path and get onto something new. Something I thought was very irritating was in the first half of the game you're met by a boss. An unkillable boss. I really don't like it when bosses are placed that way. It's as if they just want to use up all your ammo that you've been saving up to go through to the next area with as little ammo as possible. I did enjoy those boss battles, but at least let me kill the damn thing. Some areas don't use boss battles, but rather give you what feel like hundreds of the same enemies in one area. I felt like that was very lazy of the developers, as they could have placed a well thought out boss instead. Don't get me wrong, I love mowing down as many enemies as the game can give me, but sometimes it just becomes a chore. Dead Space 3 has a legacy of being the unwanted child. But in all fairness, I think they wanted to change things up a bit. Kind of like the way Resident Evil became more action-orientated. Don't get me wrong, this is not an action-only game. There are some truly terrifying moments, but unfortunately the scares are few and far between. I did like the pacing of this title, and thought that everything had its purpose, besides the stupid puzzles. But aside from that, we were given a decent game. I say decent as it wasn't the best, not by a long shot, but it's not half as bad as people go on about it. So here we are again, with the same question. Was Dead Space 3 that bad? No, I honestly don't think so. Yes, it could have been better, but if they had done the exact same thing as the first two games in the series, I think people would have said that they had run out of ideas. Kind of how God of War Ascension was received. It was a great game, but lacked that something new. This brings me to my next point. The Dead Space reboot and the Callisto Protocol. I don't even have to ask. I know everyone will be playing those. But which one are you looking forward to the most? My choice would be the Callisto Protocol. They won't be treading on old ground, as it's not officially part of the Dead Space franchise. So they won't be put into a box of whatever they can and cannot do. Maybe I'm wrong and the reboot is much better, but that's a whole different discussion for a whole different time, hopefully sooner than we think. I want to say thank you to everyone that stayed till the end. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Dead Space 3. Did you think it was as bad as the critics made it out to be? But most importantly, if you liked the video, please give it a like, a comment, or even subscribe. But for now, we'll see you in the next episode of Was It That Bad?